Do you find it peculiar that they made us read 1984 in school? Not once, not as an optional book, but generation after generation for nearly 75 years. A story about total surveillance, rewritten truths, controlled language, perpetual war, and manufactured consent. I spent a lot of time watching movies, a lot of time listening to music, more than most people would probably admit. I used to justify it by saying I was studying culture, studying symbolism, studying patterns, and maybe that was true, at least at first. But at some point, I had to be honest with myself and ask where the line is between observing something and letting it shape me. Because nothing we consume is neutral. Every film, every song, every image carries an emotional payload, even the ones that claim to be meaningless, especially the ones that claim to be meaningless. I started noticing how often the same themes repeat: violence framed as necessity, authority framed as incompetence or corruption, followed by the implication that force is the only solution. Love is reduced to appetite, identity flattened into aesthetics, rebellion sold as a brand, nihilism dressed up as realism. And the thing is, I was never told to believe any of it outright. No one had to convince me. It just showed up again and again and again, slightly repackaged until it felt familiar. Familiar things feel safe, and safe things go unquestioned. We like to think propaganda looks like orders. It rarely does. It looks like entertainment. It looks like commentary. It looks like just another story. Stories shape imagination. Imagination shapes expectation. Expectation shapes behavior. That chain is subtle enough that you don't notice it happening while you're inside it. Do you ever stop and wonder why certain narratives are endlessly reinforced while others quietly disappear? Why some ideas are framed as mature and enlightened while others labeled naive, dangerous, or outdated? Not banned, just ridiculed. You don't need censorship when mockery does the job more efficiently. I remember reading 1984 in school like everyone else. It was presented as a warning. But what happens when a warning is repeated for decades without interruption? It stops feeling like a call to action and starts feeling like a forecast. Like something you're meant to accept is unavoidable. You don't rebel against a future you've already rehearsed in your imagination. The world runs on images, screens everywhere, faces elevated, amplified, worshipped for a moment, and discarded the next. Musicians, actors, politicians, influencers, entire identities compressed into pixels. You scroll past thousands of human faces a day and feel nothing. Not because you're cruel, but because you're overstimulated, and overstimulation dulls the soul. When everything is presented as urgent, nothing actually is. Sometimes it feels less like we're living our lives and more like we're watching ourselves live them, commenting, reacting, sharing opinions instead of forming convictions. We confuse awareness with wisdom and information with understanding. I don't think we were invaded. I think we opted in. One agreement at a time. One update at a time. One, I accept. Clicked without reading. Convenience always sounds harmless in isolation. It's only in hindsight that you see the cumulative costs. And somewhere along the way we started outsourcing moral imagination, letting algorithms decide what we see, and letting outrage cycles dictate what we care about this week. We talk about freedom constantly while voluntarily narrowing our lives. I'm not saying evil is imaginary. It isn't. It's obvious. But staring into it endlessly does not make you virtuous. It makes you predictable. There is a difference between discernment and obsession. One sharpens perception, the other warps it. And at some point, after all of the observing, consuming, and analyzing, I realize that if consciousness plays any role at all in shaping reality, then what we dwell on matters deeply. If you flood the inner world with chaos, fear, and corruption, don't be surprised when the outer world begins to mirror it. That doesn't mean ignoring darkness. It means refusing to let it become the organizing principle of your mind, which is where I landed. Not suddenly, not emotionally, but deliberately. If evil exists, then good must also exist, not as a concept, but as a reality. And if both exist, then humanity needs an anchor that does not shift with culture, power, or narrative trends. A reminder that authority does not belong to men, systems, or the self-elevated to godhood, but to something higher. You can see that as control, you can see that as resistance, or you can see that as grace. But after watching the patterns long enough, I don't think the real danger is deception alone. I think it's what we allow to occupy our inner world without ever questioning whether it deserves to be there or not. First it happens in the mind, then it happens everywhere else.